It is a privilege to continue our study in the Bible about stewardship. And today we have the subtitle, Honesty with God. And we will take a Bible verse as a foundation of our study that is written in Luke 16, verse 10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. Honesty with God means, according to this text, that it is either complete or nothing. So it shows that it doesn't matter if you are honest in a little or honest in a great thing, or dishonest in a little or dishonest in a great. It does not matter. It's either complete honesty or total incomplete honesty. And as we're going to study this subject, let us remember that a steward is a one that manages not his own property. He manages that of another one. God gave him abilities to perform the task, and he must have the ability to be responsible to the owner. Honesty involves that I am dealing well with all the means the owner has given me to use for the purpose he has created me. Let's see how this looks. The man has a spirit, so he's a complete being, he's a soul, and he was made for a purpose. And this purpose is the maintenance of life on earth. He must administrate, he must manage the means that God has given him so that life and the well-being of the earth shall continue. And he must need to act for this. That's why God gave him a body and a spirit. He put to him the needs. He must work with means, that is love, righteousness, all the spiritual means that God gives. He put him the physical means, food, water, air, and all that which is needed. Then he has material means, tools that he can use for accomplishing the task. Then God gave him a wife, relationships, and children for accomplishing the purpose. And then he got an appetite and passion and sexuality to enjoy all the works in giving all that what God has put to his disposition. And of course, life itself. It is there not to be preserved, or better to say, it is only preserved as it is used to be given. The Spirit must take in order to give. We will never forget the law of life that is behind all things, because it's the general law of everything that is in this universe. Every means must be used in order to give. And this is why God gave man the ability to self-government. He must act and do things. Him was given the ability to think, to discern, to judge, to decide, to breathe, to eat, to drink, to think, to love, to be faithful, obedient, trustworthy, honest. To him was given morality and responsibility. So this is the context of stewardship. And the question that I want to ask at the beginning of this study, and it will be needed to get a clear answer, is how much shall the steward give of what he has taken? That is, how much of the means that God has put to his disposition he must give? Is it all or only a part, a partially giving? Is it all that must be given from what I take? Or is it just a part that I have to give for that what I take? So the law is going to help us here as well. The law says that all means must be transformed or passed on. There is nothing of all the means that can be kept. Nothing can be kept. What is kept is death. Imagine your stomach and your intestine will keep every day a little part of what you have put in. Just a little part. Today, a little. Tomorrow, a little. And so day after day, until one day, the whole hole would be occlused. It will be closed. And then we would have an occlusion of the intestines. And that would cause death. Imagine the heart takes the blood and doesn't not pump it all further. It just keeps a little bit for itself. What would happen? By the way, by the time, this heart would be in failure and the human would die. So, looking to the law on the physical level, there is no way that a means can be kept. It must be either transformed and serve, like we eat and breathe, that we might do something, or it must be taken from us and passed on so that it can be used for the right purpose. So the law does not permit that anything that is taken should be retained or kept. It must be given. And in the physical, we see that it is so. And when disorder is there, then we see that keeping is the opposite of fulfilling the law. So, the act that the Spirit has to do can be only done through his trust and faith in God. So, there is a direct proportion between trust and how much you give. Full trust in God gives fully because it fulfills the law completely. If he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. So trust then is the cause how much we give or not give. Trust is the cause if we are faithful in little or in great things. So let us look a little bit back. Can trust be divided? That means, can you have a partial trust? Or can you trust in God and in mammon at the same time? Can you trust both? And Jesus gives the answer. He who gave the law, he gives the answer in the Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, where he says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." It's not possible. It is not possible that you have both, because they're opposite, they're contrary to each other. So that's why we look to Adam and Eve and put the same question and says, why did Adam and Eve have only one chance to mistrust God? Why did not, when they mistrusted him, because he made them to trust him, and they were separated from mammon, and then they, in a little or in a big thing, distrusted God? And I think we can all agree that it was little things what separated them from God and put their trust in the devil. It was a little thing. But why was this little thing final? Why could not deal God with the matter like this? Oh yes, I understand, Eve, you were driven by your appetite, and Why could he not say to Eve, well, forget it. It's a small matter. It's let's look to the big things. Let's look to those that really matters. But eating from this tree is not really a big issue. Why could not God deal with things, what they did like this? He could not deal with it because it is no alternative. A little mistrust proves whole mistrust. Because you see, in the spiritual world, in the spiritual needs, where is love, there cannot be something else like a little love. It must be always either or. It's either complete or nothing. 99% of righteousness is 100% unrighteousness. 99% of security is non-security. So let us make it plain. The law says if you retain a little bit, it is like you retain all. Because it's either or. Adam and Eve had only one chance. If they would have trusted God, nothing would be happen. It was a little thing. Could God now trust them a bigger thing? Put them in another test, so to say, well, let's see. How can you prove in a bigger thing that you trust me? It's not possible. Adam and Eve had no sinful nature. They had no inclination to mistrust God. They had no inclination to anything that is evil because they were the pure, clean creation of God. They were not like us, who we are born with a sinful nature, where we from our birth trust in God and are, trust in mammon and are separated from God. But what I want to say to this, what the text proves, and what our reason will also understand is, there can be no divided trust. A little mistrust proves total mistrust. And a little trust proves total trust. This is what I take out of this wonderful Bible verse. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in that which is much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. It is either or. Jesus could not have put it better in his words. So let's go further. And looking to the way back, if we have seen that it's either or, how does the way back look like? Because God has made a plan of salvation. And are we going now from total trust in the devil and in humans at once in the total trust in God? Is that possible, a way back? Why is the way back not at once possible, but a growing experience? We must know that falling into sin was a little thing, but coming back takes the greatest effort and the greatest action of God to bring humans back into fully trust in God, in the little and in the big things. So, what is needed? That I should bind my heart again in a little trust to God, while there are still many wires in trust in humans, in myself, and in the devil. We must understand that trust is in the subconscious, is in the heart. It's not visible. It only becomes visible through our actions. They are done in our conscious will. So the will is in the conscious, and they become visible, and they become known to us. Because they all come out of whom I trust. Every action starts with trust. While trust is invisible, the action is visible. While trust is unconscious, the doing becomes conscious. So we can have a thing to orient after, because it becomes conscious. So where does my devotion, my consecration, my surrender must be complete? So in the conscious, devotion must be always complete. When God called me to repentance, He asked me one little thing: to stay with my family and not separate, because there was no lawful reason for it. And God asked me to stay. And I stood. I did that decision through my will, because God has led it so. And since then, I am in a conscious devotion to God, in which I know that I have nothing what I retain from Him. My heart is not complete in trust in God. There, I have many things, I don't know how many, bound still to trust in the evil, trust in humans, in animals, and in myself, which is all wrong, all a lie that comes through my sinful nature. In my heart, I am not complete in the trust in God. But in my consciousness, I must be in a complete devotion, consecration, or surrender. It doesn't matter how you call it. You must know that you retain nothing, you keep nothing back from what God has given you to use as a means in His work. So, let's repeat the idea. Our salvation, our going back, necessitates a way in which God gains our trust. And He can gain that trust only if it is complete. So He knew that we would not be able. Yes, with our sinful nature, no one is able to trust God anymore. So He had to destroy that sinful nature in Himself. So He became human. Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He took about Himself our sinful nature to destroy it in Himself. And He was always, from His birth to His death on the Calvary, in full trust in God. Because if He would have only once mistrusted God, all the plan of salvation would have been failed. Because it is not possible to trust God little. It must be complete. So in Christ, God restored humanity. And now He gives us that gift, that grace, that His faith should become ours. It is not that He believed for me. Let's not think that. He lived my life that I might live it as well. He exercised faith that I might exercise it as well. So He makes me capable to believe like He believes, to trust like He trusts. And this is so important. Now, not all humans that have started to be born again in the past and today and the future might come to the complete restoration in the heart. But they must be always in complete devotion in their will, in their consciousness. Because only by that they can grow to become complete. But God's plan of salvation must prove in the human being that the trust is complete. That's why at the end He has 144,000 standing on the Mount Zion. And there in chapter 14 of Revelation, they are said about them in verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have, and the faith of Jesus. The faith of Jesus became their faith. That means complete faith. In their heart, they are complete restored. Their process of growing, where trust grows in God and mistrust in the devil goes slower, is a process in which in their consciousness, in their will, they are always complete. But they come to that point where they have in their heart and in their will the same thing. Their trust in the subconscious, in their heart, is equal with what they have in their conscious will. It is that what Paul describes in chapter 7 and 8 of Romans, where he says, I want this, but I cannot do it. And in Romans 8 he says, I'm complete. Nothing can take me or separate me from the love of God. Whatever comes, there is a complete restoration. So that what in the will starts as a conscious, continuing, complete devotion, consecration, and surrender will happen in the heart as well. So that there is no discrepancy between what I want and what I do. You know that what I want is right, but what I do comes from the heart. So when those two are right, then the trust in God is complete. And the separation from the devil through the killing of sinful nature is gone. So the growing of the process back, even though it is a growing process in the heart, in the consciousness, it is a constant thing. As I look back into my life, I see that God brings me in difficult situation to open my eyes where I'm still bound in trust to myself, to humans, to the devil. And so that I realize it and become a chance in my consciousness to go to God and through grace exchange that. Take away the mistrust. Take off that line that is still bound in the wrong trust and put it in the right trust. Put it in the right place in God. I see my sins every day. And I don't despair. Because as I look to God in my consciousness, and here I only can be honest. Here I only can be sincere with Him. I can't remember anything that I keep back from Him. When I go to Him and I say, Lord, I see that I'm a sinner. My heart is betraying me. And I see that there are things that I do out of not knowing that I still trust the wrong source. But all I know in my will, in my consciousness, is yours. So help me to see what's in me there still wrong, so that through thy grace I can put it away, so that my heart and my consciousness will be the same. There should be no conflict anymore, like it was never in Christ. A conflict between what he wanted and what he did. His devotion in his consciousness was complete as his devotion in the heart. He never failed. And this faith that never failed is in our reach, was brought in our reach, that we might, through this faith, become the same in this faith, trusting complete in God. So this is the growth. And this is the process. You will never grow in your heart if in your consciousness you realize that you keep something back from God. If it is, I don't know, your wife, your child, consciously I mean. If it's subconsciously, you cannot do anything about it. But if it's consciously that you see that there are things that you keep back from God, there are things that you would say, when God would ask me this to give, I couldn't. Then you say, okay, Lord, help me. I have to deal with this. Because in my consciousness, I want to be always in complete devotion, consecration, or surrender. So let's look now. What's the connection between trusting God and using the means? This connection is inseparable. If the trust in God is full, every means is transformed and passed on. Nothing is going to be kept. Nothing will be kept because it is impossible. Because full trust in God means full fulfilling of the law, means full patience, like we have seen in Revelation 14:12. Full trust is full fulfilling of the law. Everything you take, because it comes from God, you give. And you give it as you orient yourself in trust to God. And so you are complete in God restored. Let's see how that looks practically. All is given as a result of a total trust in God. We have given love and righteousness, food, water, air, material means, tools, relationships, children, appetite, passion, sexuality, and life. And it was all given that we should take it, and it must be all is given. In total trust, all is given. And this all will be proven in the partial giving. So let's look to Abraham. Abraham was the man that had how much trust when God called him out of Ur in Chaldea? Oh, total trust in his consciousness. He was totally devoted to God. But in his heart, when he followed the call, there were many things that were still bound through his selfish nature to the devil and to humans. And he proves through his life, through his bringing God brings him in difficult situation. And Abraham has his wife as his own means that he is not willing to give. And so he lies. Well, he's not necessarily willing to give his wife. He does not want to spare. He actually wants to keep his life. So better sacrifice Sarah. Not really loving attitude from Abraham, is it? Because he trusted in him, in himself. He trusted in human. He said, this man will take Sarah because she's so beautiful, and so he lied, proving that his heart betrays him. But in his consciousness, Abraham was totally devoted to God. That's why those lines that he was already trusting God, they will never taken off again. So God recognizes his servant even when he falls into sin. And he punishes not Abraham, but he punishes these two kings. Because he's faithful to his servant, who he knows that he's in a process of growing faith, while in consciousness he wants to do the will of God, but his heart betrays him. His heart betrays him when he gets Hagar as his wife and has a son with her. And when God comes after 15 years and says, Abraham, you will have a son, the promised one. And Abraham says, oh God, take Ishmael. He says, Ishmael is not the promised son. It's not me that ordered him to be. Yes, God. Without God, Ishmael would have not been. But it was not the one that was chosen. It was not the seed of the woman that was promised. That's what we said in Sarah. Will your inheritance be? But because you distrusted me, you must know that something is in your heart that must be still cut off. So he partially cut off the foreskin for a total restoration of the heart. That cutting off was only a means to show to Abraham that in his heart he has to learn still the lesson of trust, while in his will he wants completely to serve God. So Abraham learns the lesson of faith. And now God comes. And some people don't see it as a very nice method to prove his faith, if it is total or not. But Abraham is called to give his child, his only one, the promised son, he should sacrifice on Mount Moriah. And he went. And he goes. And he has 3 days to think of until he gets there, to trust or not to trust, to trust or not to trust. Shall I do it or shall I do it not? There is no such game in Abraham. Because he knows he's God. And by giving his son, he gives a partial gift. It is something big or small, or evidently it is big. The biggest God could take, God could ask Abraham to give. But since Abraham was faithful in that which is least, God showed in front of the universe that Abraham's the father of all faithful was complete, restored in his heart, while he gave his son that which he would have most impossibly giving, because he counted it the most precious, more precious than his life. And if he would have wanted to keep his life again, he would have never brought him as a sacrifice. But he trusted God. It's his life. He can restore. He can resurrect him again. Abraham proves through one act that his heart is complete in God. The work of sanctification in Abraham came to its end. And God proved it in front of the universe by, like some people say, not such a kind method. But let's look to Job. What a kind method was it to prove Job's completeness? Here, it's not one son, because Job had 7 and 3 daughters. In a moment, all of them are taken away. In a moment, all his means and tools, all his materials is gone. And if Job would have anything of that retained for himself, he would have died. He would have not survived the test. But since he gave all, when the test came, and it's a brutal test, he proved that his heart was complete in trusting God because he has given it all before it even was taken away from him. What will we say about Christ? Who gave in the end all? Was it Abraham who sacrificed all? Was it Job's children? Was it his means or God's means? Look, all of these things, friends, they're all God's. And God sacrifices them for the salvation of man. It was God who suffered in Abraham. It was God who suffered with Job. But how shall he prove that there is a complete restoration of trusting God that will never be broken by anything? It was an easy thing when Adam and Eve sinned. It was a little thing. But to come back to restoration, it costs God everything. And he is willing, and he gave everything. He so loved this world that he did not retain any means that he had to regain the trust of a small human creature. He gave his son. Christ had to go through an easy life or through a brutal life. He was tempted like we are, but he was in full trust in God. And when he was crucified, when God gave him the cup, Jesus took it. He knew it will cost to give everything. Because that's the fulfilling of the law. That's love. If anything is kept by the means that God has given us, it is not love. It is not love. And what is not love does not come from God. Christ gave all. Paul, the great man, that said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthened me. He who gave up to have a wife, he might have wished one. As I understand him, he was a man who would have loved the companionship of a woman. But he gave it for the higher purpose of the service he was called. He would have loved to not be beaten and stoned and have shipwreck. But he gave it all. And he did not retain. And he said, I am glad that I can have all this suffering to be united with the sufferings of my Lord Christ. And then there is a little story that always touched my heart. It's the story of the widow, the woman that comes to the temple and brings her gift. And Jesus is there waiting for her. And he, as his disciples, is watching the people, how they bring their gifts into the temple treasury. And they all bring it maybe with show. Some with, oh, look at what I give. And others maybe more humble, but they still give only partial. This widow is even ashamed to put those 2 pennies in that place. But Jesus says, she gave all. You see, her 2 pennies were only 2 pennies. But they symbolized, they were the sign that her heart, her life was all for God. Isn't that which is faithful in the little things, is also faithful in much. And he who is unjust in the least is unjust in the much. Jesus did not appreciate the gifts that people gave there. Because if it was a partial gift that would not show the total devotion and surrender and consecration, then it would avail nothing. That's why Jesus wants to make clear it's all or nothing. That all that you give might be very less. It might be only a partial thing. With Abraham it was a son. With Job it was everything. 10 children. With Christ it was everything. He gave up his divinity to become human. Who knows what that for a sacrifice is? We have no idea what that means. Paul gave up, and he gave all that he has. He never retained anything what God gave him to fulfill his purpose of bringing the life back to humans. The widow gave the 2 pennies, but she gave all. Exactly like God gave it all. So what is then the role of partial giving? God asked us to give the tithe of the income. He asked us to give special offering of thanks to help the widows and the orphans. And he brings us 1 day in a week of rest. It's a partial rest for 7 days. In 7 days, 1 day of rest. Why? What is the role of all this? My friends, the role of all this is simple. They are a sign for a complete devotion. They are partial things. If you give your tithe to just be blessed by God, or not to be punished, or that you should have certain advantages, you give it for nothing. The tithe is only then a tithe when it is all what you have. When it is a sign for your complete devotion to God. Your special offerings, you give partially, yes, must be a sign that you are acknowledging that all the gifts you give, you have from God. The keeping of the Sabbath, the 1 day of rest in the week, is just a sign that you live the whole week for Him. But if you just keep the Sabbath and you work during the week for you, and you think you keep the Sabbath for God, and if the Sabbath is not a sign of a complete devotion and working even through the week for Him, then it will avail nothing. Because there is nothing. It's either or. It's no partiality in the spiritual gifts. There is no part, just here a little bit and there. No, it must be complete devotion. And God says this here, Jesus, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. So the question is, how much have you given? Now, from your heart, you don't know, but from your consciousness. Are you in your consciousness? Can you go to God and say, Lord, everything that I remember, everything that I can bring up in my mind, in my consciousness, is yours. I retain nothing. This is the only way that we can continue in growing in our heart. If it is not so, then look for ways that in your consciousness you become totally devoted to God. And then by His Spirit, He will work it out. So together with Him, you become conscious more and more where your heart is still not in trust with God until you learn the lesson of faith. Like Abraham learned it, like Job learned it, like Paul learned it, like Christ proved it, and like the widow learned it. And let us be among those who God finds and completes them for eternity. Where do you want to stand in the day when Jesus comes? On those parts that were complete in him, or on those that maybe retained a little bit? And that little bit just proves that you retain all to him. So let us prove ourselves, and we will continue to talk about these things in the next lesson, to see how the partial things are just a proof for a total devotion, because there is no partial devotion possible. It must be always in the conscious, complete.